What if I told you that a group of highly paid economists just spent nearly a decade crunching numbers, running models, comparing the UK to dozens of other countries, and their conclusion was essentially, yeah, you absolutely did that to yourselves. That's right. A bombshell new report has landed, and it doesn't just sting. It's the economic equivalent of stepping on a Lego in the dark, barefoot, on a Monday morning, every single morning for 10 years straight. Welcome back to British Reform. Let's get into it. So here's the situation. Researchers from Stanford University, King's College London, and the University of Nottingham have published a major new study through the National Bureau of Economic Research. Not exactly a bunch of fringe conspiracy theorists operating out of a garden shed in Swindon. These are serious economists with serious data, and what they've found is serious. By 2025, Brexit had reduced UK GDP by somewhere between 6 and 8% compared to what it would have been if we'd stayed in the European Union. 6 to 8%. Gone. Vanished. Not borrowed. Not deferred. Just permanently not there. Now, before anyone starts drafting an angry comment, let's just pause and appreciate the scale of that number. Because 6 to 8% of GDP doesn't sound that dramatic until you realize that the economists who warned about Brexit before the referendum in 2016 predicted around a 4% hit. They were told they were scaremongering. They were mocked, dismissed, branded as Project Fear merchants. And it turns out they weren't wrong. They were actually too optimistic. The damage ended up being twice as bad, in fact, than the Office for Budget Responsibility had calculated. But wait. It gets better. Or rather, it gets worse, depending on your blood pressure. Business investment. Oh, business investment. You know how you're supposed to attract global companies, encourage domestic firms to expand, build factories, hire people, create the dynamic post-Brexit economy we were promised. UK business investment is now estimated to be between 12 and 18% lower than it would have been in comparable economies. Not slightly lower. Not a bit disappointing. Nearly a fifth lower. Imagine running a race where your competitors are powering ahead and you're wearing a rucksack full of red tape and border paperwork. That's essentially what's happened to British businesses trying to compete internationally since 2020. And here's the really sneaky part of all this. It didn't hit like a bus. There was no single day where everyone woke up and said, right, the economy's broken. Brexit did it. Case closed. Instead, it dripped. Slowly. Gradually. Like a slow puncture on a motorway. You don't notice until you're grinding on the wheel rim somewhere near Junction 7. The researchers found that the costs were nearly invisible in 2017 and 2018, but then they accumulated, year after year, as uncertainty lingered, trade barriers rose, and businesses quietly redirected investment away from the UK. Death by 1,000 cuts. Serve cold. Now, the counter-argument, and to be fair, there is one, goes something like this. Other countries have been struggling too. COVID hit everyone. Energy prices spiked globally after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The global financial crisis left scars everywhere. And those are all real. The researchers aren't pretending those things didn't happen. What they did, and this is the clever bit, is compare the UK's performance to a group of 33 comparable economies, all 27 EU members, the United States, Canada, Japan, Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland. Before the referendum, the UK was tracking right alongside them. After 2016, the lines diverge. The UK just drift away from the pack, slowly, persistently, measurably. The other countries dealt with COVID too. The other countries faced the energy shock too. And yet the gap between the UK and its peers just keeps growing. That's Brexit doing that. The employment picture is no prettier. Around 3 to 4% fewer people in work than there would otherwise have been. That's not a rounding error. That's hundreds of thousands of jobs that simply weren't created. And productivity, the engine of long-term prosperity, the thing that determines whether wages actually go up in real terms over time. Productivity is also 3 to 4% lower than the counterfactual, which is a very academic way of saying British workers are producing less than they should be, owning less than they could be, and the economy is smaller than it needed to be. Bloomberg Economics. Meanwhile, put the annual cost of Brexit at somewhere between 100 billion and 200 billion pounds a year. Per year. Just to put that in perspective, the entire NHS budget is roughly 250 billion pounds. We're essentially leaving behind something approaching half an NHS's worth of economic output every single year. Not as a one-off. Annually. Compounding. That's the figure that should be on the side of a bus. Now, none of this means the Brexit debate needs to be relitigated in full right here and right now. There are arguments about sovereignty, about immigration control, about regulatory freedom, about Britain's place in the world that go beyond pure GDP numbers. Those conversations are legitimate and they are ongoing. But what this report does, conclusively, robustly, with data from the bottom up through individual firms and from the top down through macro comparisons, is settle the narrow economic question. The economic forecasters were right. The costs are real, they are large, they are persistent, and they are still compounding. The question now isn't whether this happened. The question is what any government, Conservative, Labour, or Reform, intends to do about an economy that is structurally weaker than it needed to be, with investment lagging, productivity stagnant, and growth trailing its peers. Because pointing at the past is easy. Fixing the future is rather harder. And that, right there, is the conversation British politics needs to be having, honestly, clearly, and without the spin. Whether it will is, of course, another matter entirely. If you want more sharp, no-nonsense coverage of UK politics cutting through the noise and getting straight to what actually matters, you know what to do. Subscribe to British Reform, hit the bell, and we'll see you in the next one.